What a great panel I get to moderate today. I'm really looking forward to hearing from each of you. So let's just jump right in. Change looks different depending on the organization, and I'd love us to ground ourselves in real examples. So, James, let's start with you. Can you share a story about a time that your organization navigated through change and what leadership decision has made the biggest difference in how your teams adapted?
For sure, Terry. Yeah, we started Oxygenate January 2020, and if you remember, that was right at the beginning of COVID. And we were really fortunate that COVID helped create a lot of awareness around indoor air quality, and with us being a ventilation company, with that we grew very quickly. We're now 245 employees. Last year we did 45 million in revenue. So end of last year, we were all high-fiving, we were all happy. We got recognized as the fastest growing company in BC, and then got blindsided with a couple, we call them speed bumps. And one is our industry is going through a big transition towards global warming, lower global warming potential refrigerants, which is great for the environment, but has caused a lot of chaos in our industry. And while we had scaled up to do about 4.5 million a month in revenue, January rolls around and we found we only had $1 million in order. So we had 245 employees and not a lot of work to deliver on that. The second thing we faced was going through a financing with our investors and having to explain to them and the bank, why we now might be offside with our bank covenants. So I pulled the management team together and tried to figure out how are we going to deal with these two huge challenges and what are some of the tough decisions we had to make. So one is, for the first time in the company, we went through a downsizing, probably one of the most painful things I've ever had to do. And then secondly, we implemented something called WorkShare, which is a program where your employees can work 3 days a week. We reduce our cash burn, and then the government supports bringing people up to 85%. So that was a really challenging point for us. We had to have a lot of open communication with our team, explaining kind of the situation that we were in, that our business was still very strong. We had to work with our bank to get them on side and show them that we had a plan for recovery, and also work with our existing investors to shore up our balance sheet. And while it's been, a very stressful few months, it was just great to see how our team, our investors, and our partners like our bank really came together. We're now back on track in March to deliver 4 million in revenue. And just being a manufacturing company, it's really difficult to kind of scale up and scale down your business. Some of the big learnings for me was I'm a big skier, and I say we got a little ahead of our skis. We got a little too caught up in the growth of the company and growth at all costs. One of the important KPIs we're tracking right now is labor productivity. And if we're going to make sure that we've got the contribution margin and revenue to support that. The second thing for me is I wish I had done that financing earlier. It's always easier to raise money when you don't need it. But again, we were very fortunate that our investors really believed in us. And then lastly, as I mentioned, just having open communication, communicate often, communicate early with everyone. And if you've got loyal partners, loyal employees, they'll all stick with you through some of these tough times.
So key, James, and it sounds like it worked, given the fact that the job sharing program was something people adopted. Tricia, you've probably seen a ton of change in your career, especially being on the people side of things. I'd love to hear from you if you have a story that you can share, similar or different than what James shared, that really resonates with you related to this question.
Thanks, Tara. Have been through some of what James mentioned as well, some of those similar difficulties for sure. But the example that comes to mind for me is we changed CEOs last year. So at MineSense, so in the middle of the year last year, we had to let the rest of the company and our customers and our partners know that we were making that change, or that we had made that change, which is obviously one that can cause a great deal of disruption and a reduction in confidence. People can look at the situation and say, what does that mean? Our employees could look at it and say, does that mean there's financial difficulty? Certainly, our customers can be shaken by that. So we really focused very heavily on transparency and communication. As James said, it is the secret sauce, and you can, just like money, no one ever thinks they have enough of it. So we need to have lots and lots of communication. And so we found that being really transparent about the process, because obviously we couldn't be transparent about the details, but we could be transparent about the process. And so being able to talk about why, what we were doing, what people could expect, really made a difference, and making sure that we addressed the things that were the concerns without them having to be raised. So we proactively addressed things like, no, this is not a financial issue, this is not. So we looked to our key stakeholders, our key customers, our key partners, and our people, and made sure that we could stabilize the business in all three of those, in the market, in the staff, and in the customers, so that we were really focused on making sure that we were openly communicating all the way through. And our new CEO started a week ago, and so we're very excited about the new chapter. But it is a very disruptive experience for a company, and we're really pleased to say that I think it's been a pretty seamless transition for us, which I think communication and transparency was the key.
That's great. Yeah. And I think it's a perfect tee up for Mo, who probably hears from boards or executive teams early on people changes. When you think about the hiring and the different organizations that you work with and you partner with, how have you seen change play out, Mo, across the different organizations that you have in your customer list? And do you have any examples that really resonate?
Thanks for having me, and thanks for the question. I think, as you said, I see a lot of different companies at different stages. And so I see patterns. And when I listen to what has been said, I think one pattern I see, that companies usually outgrow their leadership structure before they actually realize that. So there's like that phase. I'm sure James and Tricia, like, you've seen this in action. I'm thinking of a company, BC, high growth company. They were at about 80 people. They grew to 250 in probably about 2 years. So you can really sense that the founder-led organizations, decisions are made in the hallway during lunch. Like, it's very hands-on, and that at a certain size, I'd say 150 to 200, that just doesn't work. Like, things are getting too complicated. It's not going to be enough to communicate in the Slack channel. So it's kind of moving from founder-led decision making to more of a distributed leadership decision. And there's ways I've seen this work really well, where you need a formal executive team structure. And usually these high growth companies don't have that. Like, the founder is doing most of it, and everything goes through the founder. So there's some steps that I think you would kind of have to see through the organization. But the biggest leadership decision is to clarify decision rights, executive accountability, who's deciding what. And I think that's where a lot of high growth scale companies are just going through. And I think that's a good example that I see many, many times.
Great. Now, I'd love to just ground us in the second poll that Erica did around AI. We saw the results showed that no one is saying that there's no meaningful action so far as it relates to AI in their hiring strategy. And I think most of us on this call can say that we haven't. We're in meetings all the time where AI is being talked about, where we're being questioned about how we're using AI, and it's made such a big splash for the last couple of years. It feels like it's dominating almost every conversation in tech. And so, while disruption is nothing new in our industry, the speed and visibility of AI certainly presents some unique challenges. As leaders, how are you approaching AI inside your organizations right now? What tidbits or advice do you have? Mo, I'll keep you while we have you there, and have you kick this one off.
Sure. I mean, it's such a dominating topic, almost to the extreme that people, I think, start getting enough of it. Like, we need to focus on other things too. That's my personal opinion. I see the two extremes. I see companies being very cautious, trying to wait things out until things are like industry standard. And then I see the other extreme of companies experimenting pretty aggressively, little pilots in different departments, involving everyone, I think these two extremes are there. I think the best way is probably somewhere in the middle, but I think experimenting, understanding where could whatever AI tool remove friction in our daily work, I think that's a question that I would always put up front, and really understanding what's really impacting the work we're doing. And yeah, I think a topic we could have a separate discussion on, but people are going both ways, I see, and companies are really leading that differently.
James, are you seeing the barbell as well, where it's one or the other, or are you somewhere in the middle? How's your organization tackling this right now?
Yeah, I would say we're pretty early on in our AI journey. We formed a working group. It was voluntary. We just put out to our employees who's interested in this area, and we've picked a few pilot projects to try it out. So we have a software development team. So they're using AI to do some of the coding for them, and then hoping to see that we can still get the quality of code. I mentioned labor productivity, but with fewer people or more code with the same number of people. Us being a manufacturing organization, we have one of the pilot projects in quality control. So at the end of the line, when we're doing our testing, if we have some challenges, we need to troubleshoot. And so they've developed a bot to basically create this troubleshooting guide to help our quality control technicians sort of automate that process. And then the third area, it's not so much AI related, but more automation. With us being a manufacturing company in Vancouver, which isn't the least expensive place with high lease rates and labor rates quite high. In our production floor, we're implementing automation. We just put in a CNC laser with this automated tower where a lot of our sheet metal components that go into our ventilation systems, we can run a full shift cutting sheet metal fully unattended. And so we're saving 3 FTEs per day with that. And we've increased the throughput of the capacity of that particular manufacturing process by 40%. But it is capital intensive, but we see for us to be competitive in our marketplace, we need to invest in automation in this type of equipment.
Okay, great. And Tricia, I imagine you're going to have the tip of the spear answer, given your organization is AI forward all the way. Let's hear what you're working on and how your organization is using it right now.
Yeah, thank you, Tara. Obviously, AI is a part of our product, so it is fairly core to what we do. And we have a large proportion of our staff are geoscientists or data scientists or engineers. And so we have, I would say, a fairly AI literate population in the workplace. But what we've really tried to do is think about, the different lenses of how AI is impacting the business. So we have an AI committee that is primarily executive led, because we feel that it is a game changer in the industry, and so we really need to be paying attention to it. Similar to any kind of major disruption, we look at how do we separate the noise from the signal? As Mo said, there's so much out there, and how do we understand what's the upside if we get it right? How do we make sure that things are, easier, faster, safer for customers? But we've also tried to look at AI in terms of how it's adopted in the organization, and embedded it into our values, for example. So our core values drive all of our people programs, and they're very core to everything we do. So we've aligned, for example, cultivate belonging is one of our core values, and we've said, okay, AI needs to be accessible to everyone. So how do we apply any new system that we use in the organization through the lens of our values? We are also call ourselves a community of innovators. That's one of our values. So, using AI makes sense. So we have created actually some AI guiding principles around what that looks like for us. And then we've also created some sort of cases, or if you will, streams around AI for things like, technical use of AI versus customer facing teams facing AI. And making sure that we're actually looking at, what's the difference in terms of practical ways for leaders, for customer facing folks. We have an AI teams chat. We have AI champions in each department, so they're a part of our AI committee. And then we have an AI playbook that we've put together to sort of say, okay, how do we ensure that both we're thinking about do's and don'ts and safe use of AI, and making sure that we're treating AI as a shared responsibility in the organization.
I love to hear how integrated AI is into the culture. And I'm going to keep you with me on this one and kick it off with you, Tricia, just because when I think about change and challenges around prioritization. Priorities are one challenge, but keeping people aligned through change or making sure that they're rowing in the same direction as it relates to priorities is another. And culture is something that is often tested during transformation. So I'd love to hear from you. What specific practices or behaviors have helped your teams stay aligned and engaged through change? And have you ever had to retire a cultural value because it wasn't relevant or didn't serve the organization anymore? I'd love to hear more from you to kick things off.
I think similar to the first question, communication and transparency are obviously key. I think it's also really key to identify negotiables and non-negotiables. Like, where are the areas? Because people feel we all say we like change, except for we don't like to be changed, right? So we don't like to be in the receiving end of change. For control of it, it's a different situation. So giving people agency in terms of understanding what's negotiable, what can they change, what can they work on if there are large changes happening in the organization. And then thinking about, sort of how do we provide a predictable rhythm? Like, how do we bring some stability and predictability, even though many things may feel very disrupted and like they're constantly moving? Can we, even something as simple as the cadence of check-ins? If people know we're always going to get an update. I worked for a large healthcare organization during COVID, and we did all hands, 40,000 people, all hands once a week during COVID, because there was so much changing, especially in healthcare. And it really showed me that, it might seem like overkill, but it does make such a big difference if you can help people see, what is, I don't know what's actually happening or why it's happening, but I see that there's a regular access to information. I think also walking your talk, are you modeling the expectations around the change? Do you have a single source of truth? Are your executives all telling the same story? We try hard to make sure, like we have Ask Me Anything sessions at MineSense. And our first one, the executive team spent an hour working before the AMA to say, what are our key messages and how are we sure that all of us are going to say the same things in different ways, and we're presenting the same information, so that there isn't a sense of, okay, they're not even together on this. And I think the other thing I would say is honor endings. Sometimes we move quickly into new beginnings, but we don't honor endings. And I think that can leave people with a bit of a sense of, but I was attached to the way things were. I liked the way things were. And so really allowing people, even something as simple as honoring, we moved to a new building a year ago or 2 years ago, honoring that experience of like celebrating that we're closing this one and opening that one. I think it can give us a sense of closure and a sense of approachability around change. To your second part of your question, I have never had to retire a cultural value, but I do think that you can refresh them. I think sometimes you look at the behavioral statements around your values. In a large change, I think you could possibly change your values, but to me, it would more be, is the way we're articulating our values actually still relevant, and can we change the behaviors around it or change the use cases, if you will, around the value?
That's great. And James, I'll go over to you now. You talked a lot about communication being important. What specific practices or behaviors have you seen work really well? And again, same question. Have you had to retire a cultural value because it wasn't serving the organization?
Yeah, I think one of the things I've learned being a serial entrepreneur is just the importance of focus and getting the whole team aligned on several key objectives. So 3 years ago, we implemented a formal and kind of more structured strategic planning and business planning process. We're using the OKR methodology. I don't know if people have read Measure What Matters. And that's kind of really helps get everyone kind of rallied around, a few key kind of goals and objectives for the organization. One example, we develop new products every year. We had 6 products that we wanted to develop in 2026, and the management team said, we've only got the resources for 2. So it forced us to make some tough decisions about, okay, what are those 2 products that we're going to kind of focus on this year? And again, going back to communication, we've got Monday all hands meetings, 15-minute meetings where we give updates on what were our accomplishments for the previous week, what are our priorities for this week again, and it always needs to go back to those 4 corporate OKRs that we've got. And then similar to Tricia, we've got an all hands meeting once a quarter to do a formal review of all of our OKRs, both at the corporate level as well as the departmental levels. And then working with the managers, every individual has their individual key results and objectives as well.
Okay, great. Yeah, OKRs, V2 moms, they all help create that visibility across the organization, which align and get everybody rowing in the same direction. So it's great to hear that as an example. Mo, what about you? What have you seen, and what has served the organizations that you work with well?
I think, Tara, you mentioned it early on when you were leading into the question. I think culture is rarely tested during stability. And that's what you said. I think it's always tested during scale, during change. And James was giving excellent examples, Tricia as well. I think there's a few things that also both of you mentioned. I think what I see as probably the three most important things here is the first is just repeating that strategy constantly. Every opportunity you have to talk to leadership teams or your entire staff, repeat that. I think people underestimate how many times you have to say certain things about your strategy to actually make them stick and work. I think that's number one. I think the second is radical simplicity. Like if you can't put your strategy on a one pager, no one's going to understand it and no one's going to follow that. So that's for sure a second piece. And the third one, I think, is about being vulnerable as a leader and understanding, communicating what you know, what you don't know, how you're going to fix things, being open about that. And I think that's where a lot of leaders in these change situations sometimes feel the pressure to be very certain about everything. And they don't have to. Like they can openly say, this is what I know. This is what I don't know yet. And this is how we're going to try and figure this out together. And being vulnerable, sharing that with everyone, I think is key. And that's what I've seen. If people do that, people are naturally going to follow you. To that earlier question about retiring values, I kept thinking of the super fast growing companies. I think usually it's all about move fast at all cost, like pressure, high speed. That creates or nurtures certain values. But I do think values are not static. Like values are changing as organizations mature, as they get bigger. So I wouldn't say like change your values or retire values, but I think it's if you're a 200-person company, your values might change over time, and that's okay. That's definitely something I'd say to retiring values.
I think that's spot on, Mo. And I love what Tricia said about honoring that moment. I think it's really important. But this also leads to the pace of change, right? And there's a saying that things have never been this fast, but they'll also never be this slow again. And it's something as leaders we struggle with, right? Finding that balance between agility and protecting your base. And I would love to hear from you, Mo. How do you balance moving fast and innovating with maintaining stability? And then how do you choose where to experiment, and where it's worth the effort or the risk?
Great question. I think if I look at the scaling companies in BC or other across Canada, I think the challenge is rarely lack of ideas. I think it's more the opposite. So like too many initiatives happening at the same time, people are getting confused, not really know what to follow and what to believe. So balancing from moving fast and maintaining that stability is usually not about slowing down, but it's, as James said, focus, like really tight focus. What do we want to achieve here? And that leads to, okay, limit the number of strategic initiatives. Like don't do 8, do 2 and do them really well and focus on that. I think that's a key thing. Second, I think give it a try, experiment, pilot these things before you scale it. Another thing I think James also mentioned there. And third is probably define success before launching an experiment. Like understand what success looks like in 90 days and know these are the 3 things we're going to measure this from. So that's probably what I would say here. That makes sense.
Yeah, it makes total sense. I think also, yeah, to just double down on your point about measuring it, it ties nicely into what James was saying around measure what matters, right? And making sure you've got those defined up front. It's so important. Trisha, do you find that this is a theme for you? How are you thinking about balancing innovation, instability, and where to spend time on experiments?
I think for me, I think of it in sort of three levels of the organization and the change required. So because as Mo mentioned, sometimes it can feel like just change is relentless and coming at us from all directions. And so fully aligned with the recommendation that focus is the answer. But I think also splitting it into, how do you maintain core stability in things that you don't want to be disruptive? You don't want your payroll to be disruptive, or your customer billing, or your uptime, your regulatory approvals, your, change controls, those kinds of things. So the things that you want to keep stable, I think it's useful to sort of be conscious about identifying those are the things that we don't want to experiment very much with, and to make sure people know that these are things that we may change in the future, but they're not changing right now. And then I think looking at sort of customer value, where can you move quickly, but having guardrails so that you're not impacting customers negatively, short experiments, time boxed, pilots, and then sort of defining where is the true innovation zone. So where are the things where you can move fast, you can prototype, speed is a deliberate choice where you can say, okay, we're going to try things in smaller scales, we're going to prototype. And I think part of that is looking at, is the decision reversible? So what's the impact is this something like, what's the overall impact of this decision? If this is something like a major change, an acquisition, a platform changes, strategic pivot, those are bigger changes that need deeper validation, need more conversation, need more thinking, need more stakeholder involvement. But something quickly that is, a lesser change, if you will, is something I think where you can bring more speed. And I think it's understanding where is speed an asset and where is stability or core stability more important.
And James, we'll round out with you on this. Innovation is in your blood as a serial entrepreneur. So, recognizing you're going to have a lean here in terms of innovation, but would love to hear how you balance.
My management team and I had a very frank discussion the end of last year on this very topic. They were like, James, why are we growing so fast? This is stressful. It's chaotic. It's not fun anymore. We're sacrificing quality. Can't we slow down? And then me on the other side, I was like, so what do I tell our customers? We're going to stop taking their orders. Um, and then we hit that speed bump that I was telling you about, and I had a bit of an aha moment. I said, we actually have an opportunity here. We didn't kind of bring the slowdown, but it's an opportunity for us to sharpen the saw. Let's get the, business processes and systems, those things that have been tripping us up. Let's still have some of our team dedicated to getting customer orders out the door during this slow period. But let's take some of we call them these tiger teams, to basically improve our ERP system, integrate our CRM with our ERP, to allow us to scale much quicker this year without having the pain of the chaos that we had last year. So it was sort of fortuitous that, the slowdown happened at a time where we really needed to kind of retool the business, to be able to scale up quicker. It's like you can't run a sprint every day. You need to kind of take a break and then have the sprint. But it's hard to pick, when do you have that period of pause to retool as a company?
That's a question we ask ourselves. Is this a sprint or a marathon? And we need to decide which it is, right? So I'm gonna ask one more question, just conscious of time, and I want to make sure we can get to the questions in the chat. Um, how do you communicate difficult decisions while maintaining trust when it might not be possible to be fully transparent? We've touched on this a little bit, but if you have a specific example in the past that you can share, that would be great. And more specifically, I'd love to hear, how do you decide what to prioritize first? What metrics, what feedback, what indicators tell you that you're on the right track when you know you can't give the full picture? James, do you want to kick us off on this one?
I think number one, it goes back to I think what all of us talked about again. It's just that transparency, and we've just made the decision not to hide anything. Like I was through that challenging period over the last quarter. I was open with our team about we're running out of cash. We need to make some tough decisions. But what I was able to show them was, hey, we still have a strong backlog going into 2026. The leading indicators of quoting activity, our customers getting us specified as basis of design, those are stronger than they've ever been. It's just this kind of one period. And I think, our company, while we're young, is we've just kind of built that trust that, even though we're going through this tougher period, that they believed in the leadership team, they believed in me, and that we're going to get through it. And I think it was the same with our investors. We built up, I think, so much goodwill over the last 6 years. They were like, okay, we're going to take this as an opportunity to double down on the company. So I think, yeah, the clear communication, but having the data that you can go back to your team and partners to show them, okay, we're on the right path. This business has solid foundations, and every business is going to go through some tougher times, and we just got to make sure that we've got a plan to get through it.
Mo, what about you?
I think I mentioned something similar, but I think in these times, most employees or candidates that I talk to in these searches, for example, they don't expect perfection from leaders. And I think the transparency and explaining the rationale, why are we changing? That's the most critical part. That's the number one out of everything. Explaining why things are changing and happening, the impact of that change to them. Don't make them assume what's going to happen. Be transparent as much as you can, obviously, as a leader. And I think Tricia mentioned that earlier, being consistent on the leadership team. If different leaders say different things in different meetings, people are not dumb. They're going to catch that, and they're going to start making assumptions. They're going to go back home to their partner saying, I think things are happening. I need to find a new job. Like, these things are happening when consistency is not there. And I think just avoiding over-promising, like being pretty transparent. James has given great examples, because I think it kind of summarizes, like, clarity is kindness, but even difficult clarity can be clarity and just something that people can work with. And that's I think key to these scenarios.
Tricia, round us out here. You're in a unique position where you're not just having to help lead through the change, you're also coaching your peers around the executive table, and helping them show up in the best way. What have you seen, and what tactics are you employing, not just from a coaching leadership perspective, but also with the organization?
Yeah, I think what's already been said is, I would double down on in terms of transparency and telling people what you can tell them, and telling people that you can't tell them things, telling them we can't give you this information, but when we can, we will. And I think it's also, Mo mentioned vulnerability earlier in the conversation. I think it's leaders are human too. And so being able to say, look, we're doing the best we can. We ask you to trust us. We, like, as James said, he's built a relationship with his stakeholders, his team, his investors that trust him. And so I think that makes a difference. It's one of those things where this is something that we experience the outcome of the behaviors we've been building, the culture we've been building. If we've built a culture where there is trust and transparency, then when we can't tell people things, they go, okay, I understand that you're going to tell me when you can, or there must be a reason that you can't tell me. And I would say the other thing I lean on is respect and values. Obviously, some things you can't share because it wouldn't be kind or respectful to the people involved. And so when people get frustrated by that, I will sort of bring them back to that basic idea that if it was you in the situation, would you want us to talk about it? Like, we will always put people's basic dignity and respect before other decisions. And so sometimes that means you don't get to know the stuff you want to know. And I'm sorry that can be frustrating, but we will always hold to that commitment to dignity and respect. And I think people appreciate that, because then they know when they're in that situation, they'll be treated the same way.
Thank you. Erica, I see that there are a few questions in the chat. Do you want to take us there?
Sure, that would be great. Thanks for our audience for posting a few questions here, and I'll bring them to our panel. And the first one it's a bit of a long one. I'll read it out to you, but our audience member is asking, we found that unlearning is probably one of the hardest changes we have to work through as an organization, especially with AI now in the mix. How do you get that idea across to your team? What is the most effective way to encourage a different way of thinking that may be contradictory to what they're used to? And I know, Tricia, you spoke a little bit about your values and about how you've made AI accessible to all. I wonder if you have some comments on how you've approached that idea of unlearning a way of doing things and embracing a new way of doing things.
Yeah, thank you, Erica. I think for us, it's really about being a learning culture. And so that's something that really, I think, I'm a big fan of Adam Grant's work, and in his book, Think Again, he talks about, the power of being able to say that you're wrong, the power of being able to understand that you don't have all the information and that you may need to, make a change. For example, I'll give a concrete example. We just released something in the company that we thought was going to be a positive. We're doing something related to our OKRs. We are creating KR champions, and we released something related to that we thought was going to be a positive, and it's landed not as a positive at all. And so my intention is to stand up in our next all hands meeting and say, hey, we made a mistake. We thought that was the right thing to do, and we've heard from you. We listened. We understand that, you know what, we're going to change it because we heard you. And I think that's a lot of it, is your leadership team being able to model humility, being able to model mistake making, and being able to treat learning as something that is a value in and of itself. That, we often say to our leaders, we don't expect you to have the answers. We expect you to have good questions. And so I think it's your framing as an organization. If you expect people to have, if you think as a leader it's your job to know everything, then it comes across really hard when you're saying we have to do things differently. But I think understanding that we're all gonna, it's part of innovation. It's part of being an agile company, is being able to receive new information and change your mind. And I think that's a strength that demonstrates maturity in leadership and in just in thinking. So I think it's just promoting that that's an okay thing. It's a positive thing.
Thank you. James, maybe I'll come over to you if you want to comment on this. I know you told a story about having to maybe unlearn yourself a little bit or shift and pivot a bit in the business, but I'll let you weigh in on this.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things I've noticed in the last 6 years is a lot of our kind of processes have just kind of evolved. And so one is, I'll call it our order through cash process. And we were looking, and we're just like, it's amazing how many different people touch that process and how many manual steps. And is there opportunities for us to automate that or improve, our ERP system? So we're actually setting up a team to focus on re-engineering some of our processes that just kind of evolved to say, okay, we're using the sticky notes, what is our as is process, get a cross-functional team, and then just say, okay, using some of the new tools and technology that we have, if we could redesign this process, what would it look like? And so trying to, kind of unlearn what we've done before, with the goal of increasing productivity and quality, in our business systems. So it's something new that we're just trying out now. So stay tuned to see how that one turns out.
That's excellent. Mo, did you want to jump in on this one?
I mean, I think in the end of the day, unlearning, being aware that you have to unlearn certain things, I think that starts with the awareness, which I think is a key element here. If you're aware that you need to change certain things, that's 50% of it. And if we then think, what is it usually? It's probably 50% of what we do daily are habits. And habits are biases, are things that just happen naturally in our brains. So I think unlearning is not that like moment we have to focus on. It's just rewiring new habits and new repetitions, and that's a process you can read a bunch of books on and figure it out. But I think the fact that this question came up means the company is aware they have to change certain things, and that's great already. A lot of companies don't even recognize that, right?
That's excellent. Thank you. One of our other questions from the audience asks, how do you personally manage the stress and pressure of making high stakes decisions? So going through rapid change is difficult for the individuals at the helm. So do you have any leadership approaches or thoughts on how you personally manage that stress? James, do you want to weigh in here?
Yeah, it's quite timely for me, just given what we've been through. But I kind of give myself sort of one day to kind of get depressed and sulk, and then I go home, I get a good night's sleep, and you wake up the next day and you're ready to fight again. And it's just, this is, I think because I've been doing this a while, there's certain things that are in your control and other things you can't, and you got to rally the team. But you do need to take a period to kind of mourn, and and then you just got to get back up again. And that's kind of what I've sort of taught myself to do. But at the end of the day, when you're a CEO, you've got to put on the brave face when you come back in the next day to your team. You got to show them that you've got confidence, everything's going to be okay. And so the sulking you kind of got to do on your own, maybe with your wife, your kids, and they see the dark side more than anyone else. But with your team, you got to be careful in terms of the face that you present.
Mo or Tricia, do you want to share some thoughts here?
I think for me, there's like there's one thing that is not negotiable, and that always comes first, and that's health. I mean, James has maybe 80 problems and he's going to solve them all. I know that. And Tricia also. But if health is not in order, then you only have one problem. So like, I just know that I need an hour a day to myself on the bike that you see next to me here, or running or doing something that just keeps me sane. And then I can focus on the other things. But if my health is not in order, I can't help anyone. So that's just out of question. Very easy one.
Tricia?
Yeah, I think both really excellent answers to the question. I think for me, it's similar to what James said. I don't necessarily time box it to the one day of sulking, but allowing yourself to feel the feelings you're feeling, even though you can't feel them publicly necessarily, can't necessarily express them in front of your team, but letting yourself be honest that, you are frustrated, having somebody you can talk to about that it's hard. I think for me, it's also I always use, I'm going to sound a bit like a broken record, but I come back to my values and I look at, what is the thing I'm trying to achieve? What is the goal we're after? And do I feel like the stress, the pressure, the difficulty, am I still aligned? Am I still on track? Am I still going after the right things? Am I still holding into my own integrity? Am I still showing up in my values every day? And if I am, I think those ground me, those give me comfort in terms of, okay, that's a bit the compass. And as Mo said, one of those might be looking after your own health, right? And am I considering all of those things? So yeah, for me, it's kind of having that light that pulls me forward. The thing we're trying to do is important.
Eric, if I can, one other thing that comes to mind that's really helped me out over my career, and particularly, recently, is just surrounding myself with kind of really good kind of advisors. And so I'm lucky I've got a really strong board of directors here. I was on the phone with them every day. I've got, fellow entrepreneurs who are my friend group. I know some people belong to some of these kind of peer groups like McKay and YPO and YEO. And to me, those are just so invaluable that, these challenges, you're never going to figure it out on your own. Some things you can talk to your management team about and some you can't, but by surrounding yourself with really kind of smart people who are good listeners, and kind of help you think through some of those challenges has been really important to me.
Yeah, that's excellent. I know you're a part of our C Council groups as well. And I know Tara's been involved. And Mo, I think, and Tricia all have attended C Councils in the past. So those, yeah, I see that in our peer groups where, part of it is a listening board, a little bit of group therapy that happens, but also sharing like what's working, what's not working across your businesses and learning from each other. So with that, thanks to our audience. We won't get through all the audience questions, but I might stop us there. And I just had one final question for all of you. Keeping in mind that many folks on the call today may be startups or earlier in their company growth story, just starting out, but have very big ambitions. So maybe I'd ask each of you to share some of the key takeaways that you'd like them to take from today's session or parting words. And I'll come to you, Tricia, first.
Yeah, thank you. I think my key takeaway would be, transparency and communication, and being, pacing yourself through change. That change is not something that we just have to go through and survive and come out the other end, because it doesn't really stop. And so it's really about maintaining that balance, sort of all of the questions we talked about, right? How are you looking after yourself? How are you communicating? How are you making sure there's transparency and consistency? But recognizing that, there's a huge amount of energy in change. There's so much opportunity. There's so much potential that can feel overwhelming sometimes, but to try to also lean into the exciting part of it, I guess.
Excellent. Thank you. James, I'll pass it to you.
Yeah, my advice goes out to any of the kind of founder CEOs that are on today. And it goes a little bit to, Tricia talked about the change in CEOs at MineSense. And I'm a believer that, there's different leaders who are great for different stages of the company. I consider mine the 0 to 50 million guy. And we've kind of hit 50 million, and I'm a little outside my league. And I'm like, okay, who's going to bring Oxygenate from 50 to 250? And I think for kind of founders, CEOs to have that self-awareness, to know that they don't have to be the person there for the full life cycle of the company. There's always a role, but it may not be kind of leading the company. And so look to others, because sometimes it's difficult to see that maybe you're not the right person to take the company to the next level, but be introspective enough, talk to your board or friends and have a check-in periodically just to say, okay, am I the right person for this next stage of the company? And if you're not, hey, that's okay. You still hopefully have, still a big piece of ownership in the business, and you want to do what's right for your customers and your employees and your investors. So if stepping aside is part of that, then that's okay.
That's excellent. Thank you. Mo, I'll come to you next.
Yeah, I'm thinking of, maybe there's some runners out there, and if you've run longer distances, half marathon or a marathon, there's usually the saying, take these gels 10 minutes before you need them. Don't take them when you feel depleted and hungry and parched. Take them before. And that's kind of the story I would say here. If you're talking about your team, build that role clarity before you need it. Take that gel 10 minutes before you need it. And probably another advice that I see across organizations is invest in that second layer of your leadership team. Don't just focus on the board directors and the C-suite, but look at the senior managers, the directors, that mid-tier level. They're going to push your growth. And I see a lot of companies missing this out sometimes, and then they're wondering that there's no succession, no one can step up. So that's definitely advice number 2 I'd have here for people. So role clarity earlier than you need it, and invest in mid-level leadership across the organization. These are the 2 things I'd say.
Excellent. Thank you. And Tara, I'd love to hear from you. Thoughts for folks on the line who are just starting out and have big ambitions. What are some of the takeaways you'd like to leave them with?
I would say 3 things. One is build adaptability into your culture early. And as this is all the way through the hiring process, what you celebrate, the wins and the failures that you celebrate, making sure that it's built in early. I think the companies that scale really well are the ones that treat change as a constant, not an exception. And the second thing is stay relentlessly close to your customers. They will show you what's changing in the market, what's shifting, and they're going to give you such valuable insights and fast signals so that you understand when your strategy needs to evolve. And then the third is always invest in your people and your culture from the beginning. This is the foundation of everything you do. And there's that saying, culture eats strategy for breakfast. It's true. And so, strategies are going to change. Technology is going to change. But if you have a team that's curious, that's aligned to your strategy, and they're willing to learn together and navigate change, you can conquer almost everything. So I would say making sure that you're looking at those 3 things as you lay the groundwork to scale your business.
Well, thank you for summing that up, all of you. And thank you, Tara, for moderating such an excellent discussion.